I cannot stress enough how excited I am to have you. It's such a pleasure and such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to sit here together with you. So this is what's happening on the human realm, as told through these East and Western, Greek and Christian and Jewish narratives. What's happening on a metaphysical level is that the same way that there's a masculine and feminine human, there's also a masculine and feminine in the cosmos, in the divine. The Kabbalists refer to this as Kutchabrichu and Shechina, different terms that basically encompass what they mean when they speak about the masculine deity and the feminine deity. And what's happening is that when the human comes into a sacred sexual union with another human, what's happening is not only are they mimicking the divine reunion, which is the ultimate goal of the entire cosmos, to bring those two halves back together, but they are actually affecting that reunion, and they are bringing that union to happen by doing it down here below. It happens above. There's a beautiful practice which comes out of the Kabbalists, which is l'shem yichud kudsha b'rechush, can say that anytime that a Kabbalist would do a mitzvah, do a precept, either a sacred or ethical act, they would say, the reason I'm doing this, l'shem yichud kudsha b'rechush chantei li'achadai, I'm doing this to unite kudsha b'rechu and Shekhinah. I'm doing this to unite the divine masculine and the divine feminine, which is why Moshe Idel calls mitzvot the divine aphrodisiac. It's that which is bringing the sexuality back. We're bringing sexy back to God, to the kudsha b'rechu and Shekhinah that being lost. The shem yichud. We hold our tzitzit together. We hold them united, which represent the two sides which are separate, and we say we're bringing these together so that we can unite our entire day. We can unite all our thoughts. We can unite our speech and our action. We can unite our heart and mind. We can unite the masculine and feminine. We can bring these things back together. And bringing, it's so important to say, no, I'm doing this out of love. I'm doing this with a purpose. And I think it's important to speak that into existence, not just to think it, to say, the shame for the sake of sanctifying X, Y, and Z, for the sake of unifying X, Y, and Z. These are spells that we utter. That's magic that we bring into existence, and our words create reality.
Intentions. When you bring intentions to everything that you're doing, especially sex, because we tend to have a relationship with sexuality that is very much the opposite of sacred. And I feel that bringing about this other realm, this divine sacredness that is in it, and bringing another as an intention whenever I'm about to make love is profound. It's really changing the whole experience completely. Suddenly it doesn't feel like it's just you and I fumbling bodies around each other. It feels like we are engaging in a dance that is about much, much, much bigger dance, a much bigger perspective, a much bigger dance of unity with the whole. And it feels like the whole entire universe is being more united with us in this sacrament. And it's just, of course, that's divine. Of course, this is where you mentioned the name of God. Why would you deprive God from the expression of your sexuality? Right? Like,
no door of a tent opened up facing the door of another tent. That it was door to wall, door to wall. So everyone had privacy. That every family had the sanctity of its own privacy, its own space, so that within that space, there could be love and intimacy and sensuality and vulnerability, but it didn't have to be open to the street. It wasn't one big orgy. And that's what he saw in the tents of Israel. He saw that there was space for sensuality, and the relationship between borders, between disclosure and between secrecy, between exposure and between privacy. That is where the beauty of the balance is. And anyone who knows eroticism knows that eroticism comes when there's boundaries, when there's borders, when there's mystery, when there's withholding, when there's disclosure, and those things have to be in a dialectical relationship always. There are many commandments, many mitzvot. Mitzvah actually really doesn't mean commandment. It means an act of bonding. Tzavtza is where the word mitzvah comes from, to connect. All of these modes of connection, all of them lead up to a unification with God. And as far as the Kabbalists structure their worldview, whether it's Torah or acts of goodness and kindness or prayer, all these things are, not only do they all lead up to a moment of sexual intimacy between the soul and God, but they also lead up in the human life towards the intimacy between a husband and wife on Friday night, the way that the Kabbalists structure their sexual lives, which is a deeply spiritual, and that's really the moment of consummation to elevate it. It's the pinnacle of the service of the Kabbalist. The notion, and this may be very bizarre for someone who's coming out of other forms of contemporary Western religion, there was no act in the human realm, in the human existence, that was as sacred and as potent for the presence of God as the act of sex and sexuality. In fact, the Kabbalists write that the human, who is this mirror image, this microcosm of God, as we've been speaking, this thing which Genesis tells us is created in the image of God. Naseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmotenu. When is the human most like God, say the Kabbalists? And there's all different answers, very beautiful answers from the tradition. But the Kabbalists, riffing on that theme of imitatu Dei, of Vahalachta b'drachav, of imitating God, say, when is the human most like God? God is the creator. God is the infinite creator who never stops creating. And the human, say the Kabbalists, has the koach ha'ein sofi, the power of the infinite, the power of Ein Sof, of God in them, in the act of procreation, where they take from themselves and they perpetuate existence forward in an infinite loop that continues to create. And that moment of consummation of sexuality is a divine moment, both because we are taking what is otherwise a limited human, right? We are mortal, we're going to die, and that's what makes us human, right? And we become immortal. In the book of Genesis, God says, let us not let them eat from the second tree, lest they then eat from the tree and become like the gods that are immortal. In the act of sexuality, when we imitate God in sanctity and purity, we perpetuate our own immortality going forth in the generations that we create. But not only in the act of perpetuating physical and biological progeny, but in that moment itself, what we create is we create a moment which is beyond time itself. We enter into a space of immortality in an eternal moment. It's not just about, the child that may come forth from which is a beautiful thing, and that's part of that koach ein sofi, but the Ein Sof, the infinity, is that we ourselves enter into the enactment of the divine cosmos, of the unification between the masculine and feminine, which is the entire picture coming together, which is why in the moment of sexuality, very often it's simply beyond time and nothing else in the world exists, because that itself is the summation of existence. And the Kabbalists, who some people see as very old school and sexually repressed, these are not my words, these are the words of the Kabbalists, who see this moment as an ultimate culmination of spirituality. And the Kabbalists believe that every step in the divine process of creation is mirrored and happens in the human process of creation. Every human has their own shvira, their own simtsum, their own tikkun, their own olamot. It all happens in the human. And humans inevitably go through a very difficult and very lonely period where they don't know what it means to have sexuality. They don't know what being attracted to another human sexually means. And these things are all very difficult, and they're filled with turmoil and pain. And the Kabbalists have language to describe this in a theological, metaphysical, psychological register. But unfortunately, instead of using those tools to help young men and women growing up in religious communities, instead of using those tools that we have to help them identify and speak about and articulate what they're going through so that they can better feel it, they can begin to communicate, we instead repress it, and we shun it, and we discriminate against it. And partly to fault of the Kabbalists, but I think that the Kabbalists didn't want us just to take their system and continue it as it was. They want us to improve upon it. And I think that we have to look within the Kabbalistic tradition itself for languages of divine order eroticism, and understand where in the metaphysical system that process was a necessary, if not perfect, step in the process, and when in the human life is that a necessary, if not perfect, step in the role. And as you're saying, instead of children being educated about sexuality from pornography, we can sit down with them and talk to them with our holy tongue, with holy words, with holy traditions, about a difficult and painful process, about a beautiful process of growing and fumbling and learning. And they don't need to be shamed, and they don't need to be vilified, and we don't need to tell 14 and 16-year-old children that they're creating demons when they masturbate. That is not helping anyone. It is a heinous crime that we commit when we demonize and when we torture our own children with our theology. And we have to stop doing that. We have to understand ourselves that there's a place for self-exploration. There's a place where God in the creation of the universe has to self-explore before there's a female to explore with. The Kabbalists see a tremendous potency, and this is not just true for the Kabbalists. All mystics see a tremendous spiritual metaphysical energy contained within the human seed and within the human egg, and they go on to bloody well create human beings. So they are potent, and the Kabbalists see the temptation of the individual to just turn into themselves in just a selfish act of pleasuring, where nothing substantial is created. There's no relationship. There's no need for encounter. But we can aspire to move beyond just pleasuring ourselves. We can aspire to pleasuring another human being as well in the process. We can aspire towards just selfish pleasure to collective pleasure. I'm not saying these things as dogma. I'm not saying these things as Bible. I'm saying these things as thoughts, as a fellow human, a fellow seeker, trying to engage critically with my tradition in a way that's responsible to the text and responsible to the humans living it, and in a way that's honest of my own experience.
Thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure connecting with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Yuval. It was a real pleasure to connect, to speak openly and to speak thoughtfully and to speak to have someone to speak in harmony with, so that we're not just voices shouting in the wilderness alone, but we can begin to connect our voices with one another.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, brother.